Chapter 7, Nutrients Important for Fluid and Electrolyte Balance. Maintaining the right level of water in your body is crucial to survival, as both having too little or too much water in the body will result in less than optimal functioning. Please read through the introductory slides. The human body is mostly water. While water makes up the largest percentage of body volume, it's not just pure water. It's a mixture of water, cells, proteins, glucose, lipoproteins, electrolytes, cations, anions, and other substances. In the human body, water and their solutes are distributed into two compartments: inside the cells, called intracellular, and outside the cells, called extracellular. One of the essential homeostatic functions, called osmoregulation of the body, is to maintain fluid balance and the differences in composition between the fluid compartments. The movement of water between those fluid compartments happens by the process of osmosis. Water simply moves from an area of high concentration to an area of a lower concentration. Under normal circumstances, a cell maintains its water volume at a constant level, but the composition of the solutes in a cell is in a continuous state of flux. So to maintain water balance, a cell controls the movement of electrolytes to keep the total number of dissolved particles the same inside and outside the cell. Please read through the next few slides on water's importance to vitality. Every cell, tissue, organ, and the entire human body has to balance water output with water input. The amount of water a person should consume every day is variable, so it should be based on the climate the person lives in, as well as their age, physical activity level, and their kidney function. Thirst results from a complex interaction of hormones and neuronal responses that coordinate to achieve fluid balance and composition in the body. Thirst is triggered by either a decrease in blood volume or an increase in blood osmolality. Other mechanisms by which body water balance is maintained are aimed at controlling the water volume of urine. The amount of water filtered from the blood and excreted as urine is dependent upon the amount of water in the blood and the electrolyte composition of the blood. One way the body ensures adequate water input is through thirst. Receptor proteins in the kidney, heart, and hypothalamus will detect decreased fluid volume or an increased sodium concentration in the blood. Hormonal and neural messages are relayed to the brain's thirst center in the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus will then send neural signals to higher sensory areas in the brain, stimulating the conscious thought to drink. Fluids are then consumed. Receptors in the mouth and the stomach will detect mechanical movements involved with the ingestion of fluids. Neural signals will then go to the brain and the thirst mechanism is now shut off. Water output is primarily regulated by the kidneys, and this involves communication with the brain and the endocrine system. There are two types of outputs. Insensible water loss, meaning we're unaware of it, is where the body loses about 400 milliliters of its daily water output through breathing. Another 500 milliliters is lost through the skin. Sensible water loss means we're aware of it. Urine accounts for about 1,500 milliliters of water output, and feces accounts for roughly 100 milliliters of water output. Kidneys contain protein that act as sensors that will detect blood volume. When the blood volume is low, the kidney cells detect decreased pressure and they will secrete the enzyme renin. Renin then travels in the blood and cleaves another protein into the active hormone angiotensin. Angiotensin targets 3 different organs, the adrenal glands, the hypothalamus, and the muscle tissue surrounding the arteries, to rapidly restore blood volume and consequently pressure. Sodium and fluid balance are intertwined. Read through the following slide regarding the hypothalamus and blood osmolality. The adrenal glands also detect blood osmolality. The adrenal glands are tiny glands that sit atop of the kidneys. They will sense when sodium levels are low and when potassium levels are high. In response to either stimulus, they release aldosterone. Aldosterone is released in response to angiotensin stimulation and is also controlled by blood electrolyte concentrations. In either case, aldosterone communicates the same message, which is to increase sodium reabsorption and consequently water reabsorption. In exchange, potassium is excreted. Cells are about 75% water, and blood plasma is about 95% water. The maintenance of the unequal volumes of water between these fluid compartments is achieved by balancing the force of water against the force of all dissolved substances. Concentration means the amount of particles in a set volume of water. The force driving the water movement through the selectively permeable membrane is the higher solute concentration on the one side. Solutes at different concentrations on either side of a selectively permeable membrane exert a force called osmotic pressure. The sodium-potassium pump is the primary mechanism for cells to maintain water balance between themselves and their surrounding environment. The maintenance of water volume between fluid compartments is achieved by keeping the concentration of all dissolved substances between those compartments the same. Individual solutes are at different concentrations between fluid compartments, providing a mechanism by which to control water movement. Sodium is the primary regulator of water balance and plays important roles in nerve transmission, muscle contraction, and nutrient absorption and reabsorption. Most sodium in the typical American diet comes from processed and prepared foods. Many athletes experience a condition where they have too low of a blood sodium level, but it's not so much the result of excessive sodium loss in the sweat, but rather drinking too much water. The excess water dilutes the sodium concentration in the blood. Illnesses causing vomiting, sweating, and diarrhea may also cause hyponatremia. The symptoms of hyponatremia, also called water intoxication, since it is often the root cause, include nausea, muscle cramps, confusion, dizziness, and in severe cases, coma and death. Sport drinks are better at restoring fluid and blood glucose levels than replacing electrolytes. During an endurance event, you would be better off drinking water and eating an energy bar that contains sugars, proteins, and electrolytes. Read through the next few slides on dietary reference intakes for sodium and sodium content of selected foods. As you can see here, 77% of the average American sodium intake is from processed and prepared foods. And this is usually the highly processed sodium, not natural sources. Chloride is the primary anion in extracellular fluid. In addition to passively following sodium, Chloride has its own protein channels that reside in cell membranes. These channels are especially abundant in the GI tract, the pancreas, and the lungs. Their importance is exemplified in the signs and symptoms of the genetic disease cystic fibrosis. Chloride has several other functions in the body, most importantly in acid-base balance. Cystic fibrosis is one of the most prevalent inherited diseases in people of European descent. It's caused by a mutation in a protein that transports chloride ions out of the cell. The following signs and symptoms of cystic fibrosis include salty skin, poor digestion and growth, respiratory infection, liver damage, and infertility. Please review the next couple of slides for adequate intakes for chloride and chloride sources. Other than from table salt, chloride can be obtained by eating foods such as tomatoes, lettuces, olives, celery, rye, whole grain foods, and seafoods. Potassium is the most abundant positively charged ion inside of a cell. 90% of potassium exists in intracellular fluid, with about 10% in extracellular fluid and only 1% in blood plasma. As with sodium, potassium levels in the blood are strictly regulated. The hormone aldosterone is what primarily controls potassium levels, but other hormones like insulin also play a role. When potassium levels in the blood increase, the adrenal glands release aldosterone. The aldosterone acts on the collecting ducts of the kidneys, where it stimulates an increase in the number of sodium-potassium pumps. Sodium is then reabsorbed and more potassium is excreted. Nerve impulses involves sodium and potassium. A nerve impulse moves along a nerve via the movement of sodium ions into the cell. To end the nerve impulse, potassium ions rush out of the nerve cell, thereby decreasing the positive charge inside the nerve cell. This will diminish the stimulus. To restore the original concentrations of ions between the intracellular and extracellular fluid, the sodium-potassium pump transfers sodium ions out in exchange for potassium ions in. On completion of the restored ion concentrations, a nerve cell is now ready to receive the next impulse. As with nerve impulses, muscle cell potassium is involved in restoring the normal membrane potential and ending the muscle contraction. Potassium is also involved in protein synthesis, energy metabolism, platelet function, and will act as a buffer in the blood, playing a role in acid-base balance. Insufficient potassium levels in the body can be caused by a low dietary intake of potassium or by high sodium intakes, but more commonly it results from medications that increase water excretion, mainly diuretics as in some blood pressure and heart medications. High levels of potassium in the blood also affects the heart. It's a silent condition as it often displays no signs or symptoms. Please read through the remaining slides and watch the videos on needs and dietary sources of potassium. Please read through the next few slides on consequences of deficiency or excess. Please read through the remaining slides and watch the videos on water concerns and beverage consumption in the United States.